Devil May Cry is a name in the gaming industry that I've only really familiarized myself with recently. It's a series I've been aware of for a long time, though. I believe the first time I heard the series was through a WatchMojo.com video. Yeah, I was that kind of 10-year-old. Recently, though, I've actually grown more of an interest in giving them a shot. For a while now, I wasn't really sure when I'd be able to do so, until one day a friend of mine and I made an agreement that I would try a DMC game if he tried a Mega Man game. I know there are a lot more Mega Man games, but I'd imagine that most DMCs are much longer than the average Mega Man game. Because of this deal, I ended up picking up the Devil May Cry HD collection for the Xbox 360. I know that most of these PS2 era game compilations usually have some compromises, but I think as long as the games look and play about as good as they should, then it's not a big deal. For this game's case, the only thing that got on my nerves that I knew was a result of the porting process would be the video files. Some of the cutscenes are rendered in-game and others are video files. Due to the collection upscaling to 16:9 and raising the resolution, it becomes obnoxiously apparent what is and isn't a video file. They were meant to be able to blend together seamlessly. I'm assuming that some things were easier to have like this as opposed to being rendered with in-engine models. It's visibly incoherent at times, but for the sake of accessibility I'm sticking with it. It's not too big of a deal. This video will likely be a visual mess anyway. I recorded half the footage on a laptop, but the rest on a more powerful PC. So if you see some footage higher quality than the rest, that's why. I could have re-recorded it, but there are some things I feel only the original footage can convey. As for the menu itself, I thought the presentation was pretty bland, but it lets us see character artwork and renders from all three games, and it gives achievements. So it comes with what I think are nice added features, even if otherwise it feels a bit cobbled together. In a similar vein, I feel like they could have done a bit better with the box art here, and why is my copy in Spanish? Everything from the marketing stuff on the front, the description on the back, the details in the corner, the ESRB stuff. Not exactly everything, but how is this the one that got sent to me? What's even weirder is that the game itself defaulted to English. Devil May Cry started development in 1999, but in a way not even recognizable to what it eventually become. It was conceptualized as a Resident Evil 4, and while that seems out of left field, I do believe a lot of the survival horror DNA made its way over to the final product. Also, given that RE4 was meant to reinvent the series' formula to be more action-based, it makes sense how one stemmed from the other. That said, were this to be the fourth Resident Evil, it would have been too far of a stray from the series as it was to feel natural, or the action would have had to been compromised. The devs agreed, and the game was largely retooled to focus more on action and style. While Resident Evil 4 wouldn't release until 2005, the game that spawned from it was changed to go all in on being as cool as possible. Inspiration would be drawn from the poem The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri for the story, and in gameplay, Ami Nusha and Strider for combat and style respectively. Those last two were the ones that surprised me the most. While researching, I really enjoyed reading how Dante was made to be cool and feel familiar to audiences, like how the director Hideki Kamiya described him and what he wanted him to be like. There are some oddly specific ideas, like being somebody who'd fun to go and drink with and an anti-smoker, I guess to compete with Solid Snake. Upon release, Devil May Cry was met with critical and commercial acclaim. It was one of the highest rated and best-selling games of 2001. That's all good for the time, but as somebody playing this game for the first time over 20 years later, I want to know how it holds up. But here's the thing, not only am I a newcomer to DMC, I'm also largely a newcomer to this genre. Hack and slash, spectacle fighter, or the most direct term, action game, I haven't played a whole lot of games like that. This is my first Devil May Cry. I haven't played a God of War, a Bayonetta, a Warrior style game, Metal Gear Rising, Wonderful 101, any of these 3D combat-based games with large amounts of technical depth and style. My main experience with this style of game is from Kingdom Hearts. I love those games, but they're also direct hybrids with the RPG genre. All of that in mind, it's time to see if this is not only a good introduction to the series, but to the genre that followed in its wake. Upon starting the game, we get a prologue of the war between humans and the underworld. The Dark Knight Sparta would win and maintain peace between worlds. Back to the present, a woman falls out of the sky. That's just great. She goes to the Devil May Cry demon hunting agency. What kind of city and world is this that it requires a demon hunting agency? It's run by Dante, Sparta's son, who became a demon hunter after losing his brother and mother to them. The woman electrocutes him, stabs his sword into his chest, and tosses a motorcycle onto him, but Dante is able to get up near effortlessly. The woman reveals her name to be Trish and claims to be able to put an end to the underworld attacks. Underworld Emperor Mundus has been preparing to reclaim control of the human world. He plans the Malay Island to be the place where he links the two worlds. Dante travels with Trish to the island and to invade the castle that rests upon it. From there, the story takes a bit of a back seat and they focus on gameplay more. Before you start playing, I recommend swapping the control style to style B, where your main weapon's on X instead of your guns. The main weapon you start with is a standard sword, so having it more accessible near your jump button feels better in battle. The standard movement controls feel tight enough. The jump, on the other hand, feels off. Dante rockets up and forward at the start, but has next to no movement whatsoever once he begins landing. Also, the fluctuating speeds at which you rise and fall feels wrong to me. You also can't change your jump's direction after it starts. If you jump in place, then you have no control in any direction at all. All of this makes the attempts at platforming, especially later in the game, more difficult than it needs to be, especially since the camera angle isn't always helping. I guess to try and mitigate this, Dante can't walk off most ledges. It helps a little bit, but I feel like they could have changed the jump arc to be smoother. It's not horrible, although it could have been better. Upon entering the castle, the survival horror DNA becomes evident. Resident Evil was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the fixed camera angles. No tank controls though, thank God. I also thought the way new enemies are introduced was made to make them look as threatening and scary as possible. But don't get confused here, this would be a crappy survival horror game, because the only thing worth fearing is you. Like I said, Dante has a repertoire of weapons to choose from and fight with. You have both a main weapon and guns that you can swap between in the menu, with these cool looking animations for them. You lock onto an enemy with RB and then you can start shooting. Otherwise it lets you start using more of your special moves on your main weapon. You start with a sword as your main weapon. You have a standard 3-hit combo, but if you delay a third hit, then you get different finishers ranging from a standard third slash if you use it immediately, to a large flurry of stabs if you delay it long enough. There are also a few more to try and do, and it's really satisfying to get the higher end finishers. Sometimes it's better to get, say, the triple vertical slash compared to the flurry depending on the enemy, but even if it is optimal on what you're fighting, it can be tough to nail the timing if there's a lot going on around you. You also have an aerial dive that's used more of an approach tool rather than a combo extender. It did take me a while to figure out how you're supposed to use it effectively. By holding backwards during an aim, you can knock your enemies up into the air to extend a combo or hold them into the air with your guns. In Mission 2, you get the Alistor sword. It comes off the wall, stabbing through Dante onto the floor, and then he gets back up through the handle, picks it up, and starts kicking it around, and then beats people to death with it. This guy is freaking awesome. Once you get it, you can start buying upgrades and new special attacks with red orbs dropped from enemies. Saving up red orbs, buying new moves, and seeing how to perform them creates a really fun gameplay loop. You get more combat options, making fighting more satisfying to do. My personal favorite is the Stinger to approach enemies on the floor. Especially after upgrading it to level 2, it's incredibly long range and does a good amount of damage while priming you for your next combo. You also get a double jump, which is really helpful, although tied to Alisor exclusively. There are also a few moves you can only use during the Devil Trigger form. Yeah, this was an interesting mechanic. I thought it would have been given some build-up or elaborate introduction, but it's just something Dante can do. Which makes sense, him having devil blood within him and all. Anyway, your ability to transform is tied to these symbols on the HUD. Have enough, then press LB, and then Dante transforms into a devil. In this state, he runs faster, does more damage, and has passive health regen. He also gets more moves he can pull from. This creates some good strategy during fights. Your meter refills quickly, but usually I hold off until after I get hit to get some benefit from the regen and safely spam aerial attacks, instead of just using it for the attack boost. I loved the lightning attack that you get during it. It was great for keeping away during bosses and getting free damage safely. I thought this mechanic was great and made combat even more deep and fun. About halfway through the game, you get your second primary weapon, Ifrit, a set of fiery gauntlets and boots that let Dante punch and kick the absolute crap out of enemies. It's super fun to use and legitimately effective. The dive kick is super satisfying to use, and while the main combo doesn't have the timing aspect that Alistor has, its new moves link together in cooler ways to me. A really powerful uppercut, an insane roundhouse kick to interject mid-combo, and just straight up the screw attack from Metroid that works perfectly with the dive kick. These made Ifrit a great weapon to use against most standard enemies, although its short range made Alistor better for most bosses. Thankfully you can change between the two by pressing the right stick. The swap is slow, but I never really got punished for using it mid-boss fight. I would, though, like to see how cool it'd be if the weapon swapped instantly, letting you change mid-combo and using their unique moves together. Well anyway, Dante has a lot of guns to choose from as well. First up is his handmade handguns, Ebony and Ivory. At first I didn't think much of them, I just thought that they didn't do enough damage compared to running up and slashing people. As the game went on though, I found them really good at tacking on additional damage from a distance, mostly during select boss fights. The shotgun had the opposite effect. I liked it early on, but quickly stopped using it in favor of other weapons. Its wide range and power in close range isn't better than any of the primaries to me. The grenade launcher is phenomenal. It explodes on impact with massive power. Its firing rate isn't great, but by rolling back and forth you can pop them off constantly, and it's great with dealing with hordes of enemies that could easily pile up on you otherwise. There's the needle gun, which you get for underwater use. Oh no! Okay, it's not that bad. You go first person, it controls like Mario 64. Not horrible, but not very good. There's only one mission focused on underwater combat, and it's like 3 minutes. The combat is just shooting from the other side of the room. It's not hard or in depth. And hey, swimming is even used for a decent puzzle near the end of the game, so it's fine as a mechanic. I was just really horrified when I saw the control pop up. Finally, the Devil Beta is a completely optional weapon as far as I can tell. I got it from exploring. It costs some Devil Trigger to shoot, but the shots bounce all over the place like the Zappinator from Terraria. It does great damage and can build up stylish combos all on its own when used correctly. I ended up using it as my main gun by the end of the game because swapping weapons takes longer than necessary. I think using the D-pad should have been an option to cycle through guns instead of having to go into the menu each time. I felt it necessary to go over all of the combat options and the facets of each to show how much depth and variety the combat has. The main focus of the game is delivering fast, satisfying, and stylish combat. I think it succeeds at that because you have all these options for fighting, and they're all varying degrees of fun to use. They often synergize well together alongside being fun to use in their own right with great and satisfying sound design on top of the depth and strategy. The game also makes sure you get the most out of them because this game is pretty hard. It's not one of the hardest games I've ever played or beaten, but it will test you. Almost always in a fun and fair way too. Bosses and enemies can have attacks and patterns that can be really tough to dodge, and there are a good variety of enemies to deal with. There aren't really any enemies I find annoying, though. They're all fair and readable. Challenge is usually picking your spots when to go on the offensive or defensive. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't always want to cooperate. The fixed angles are usually fine, but sometimes they just don't give you the visibility you need to see what's going on. Sometimes you just have to walk all over the room until it decides to go back into a decent position. The fixed camera angle also made dodge rolling somewhat awkward. To roll, you have to hold to the side while aiming and press A. Press that same button while going forward or back, and then you flip. Rolling in these directions would be helpful too, more so than jumping. It's not something I can't get used to, although it's not preferred. Aside from that, I enjoy the challenge for the most part. It adds depth to the combat by having you make the most out of your offensive and defensive combat options. What does get frustrating for me is not that the game is really hard, but also that it's very punishing in a very irritating way. That's because of the freaking yellow orbs. They're a very simple mechanic, they're essentially just lives, something I am not convinced a game like this needed. You start with a few, lose one when you die, and if you lose all of them, then you reload the saves and you restart the mission with the very same amount of yellow orbs you had when you saved. In my case, I died a few times in mission 3 to the boss, and did not have enough yellow orbs to get past mission 4, a mission with a difficult mini-boss that... Okay, the problem there is I didn't even know the cutscene ended. It's a good fight, but it's not immediately obvious that you have to shoot it until it transforms into an orb and then slash at it. The game heavily punishes you until you learn that too. That's not a bad thing at all inherently, but then it gets followed by an even harder boss fight. Doing all of that with only 1 or 2 yellow orbs is just not happening on a first playthrough. You can buy yellow orbs, but they're way too expensive early on in the game. I genuinely tried to find any possible way to circumvent this. I would have been willing to use a cheat code or something to give me infinite yellow orbs if I'm being honest. However, since no such cheat existed, I found the best solution to be to grind red orbs and buy a crap ton of yellow orbs and upgrade myself. You can kill Phantom during his chase sequence right at the beginning of the mission for a few red orbs, save, and reload. So like any half-decent YouTuber, I did some off-camera grinding and came back stacked. That mission time and save count doesn't lie, this crap took forever. And even then, I was still paranoid that there would be some massive difficulty spike that would drain all of my yellow orbs, so even with 35 extra lives, if I ended up dying early on in a mission, I was resetting the game most of the time, because I knew that slight time requirement of redoing that small part of the mission would be worth doing to keep that yellow orb. I get what they were trying to do with this. If you're better at the game, then you won't have to spend money on yellow orbs and can instead just spend that on new attacks and general upgrades. I just don't think this was the greatest way to go about it because it places an artificial scarcity on how much you can retry the difficult parts. In a game in a genre that's usually about practicing to gradually get better, it feels like these two design philosophies are at war with each other. And honestly, feeling like I needed to grind to get a better shot at getting further in the game makes the thought of going back to it difficult. Which sucks, because this game gives you plenty of reasons to go back. At the end of each mission, you get a ranking. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this be anything but a positive addition for a game, and it's no different here. Based on your performance, you can get a D to an S rank. The higher rank you get, the more orbs you're rewarded with. This is a much better reward and incentive for skillful play compared to the yellow orbs. On top of that, the S ranks are appropriately difficult to get. I didn't get a single one. Good. You essentially have to do the stage really fast and without getting hit. The game doesn't explain very well what you're being graded on, it just gives you a mission time, an orb count, and then a rank. That doesn't matter to me though, this edition's great. You also get ranked on your combos. If you can keep up the pace during combat, it gives you a higher style ranking. Getting that red stylish is always really satisfying to do due to how hard it is. The ranking ends really fast if you can't keep up the speed, so you have to be fast and efficient with combos. It's also beneficial since enemies killed during a stylish combo drop more red orbs. Another great incentive for good performance. Hidden around the castle are also secret missions. These can be really well hidden and then give you a mini challenge, sometimes with a silly stipulation. These can be fun, and as a reward you get both some red orbs and a blue orb fragment. You can think of these like the heart pieces in Zelda. Collect 4 and then you get a full blue orb which extends your health. I didn't find a whole lot, but the prospect of finding and completing the rest in future playthroughs is captivating, especially as a supplement or alternative to the ranking system. The blue orb fragments can also be found around the castle. In general, I was surprised by how much there was to explore. Often you'll get these big areas that, after or in between fights, you can look around, and curiosity was almost always rewarded. You can find blue orb fragments, holy water to wipe out enemies, stones full of red orbs, and devil stars to refill the devil trigger gauge. You can also buy these, as well as vital stars to refill health and purple orbs to extend your DT gauge in the shop as well. I found exploring for them more rewarding personally. On top of that, going into certain places can cause some additional red orbs to spawn. This made me use my double jump and wall jump to explore in ways I wouldn't have really thought to do otherwise. For how combat centric this game is, I was surprised to see that its other elements were this effective. Once you beat the game, you unlock a hard mode, which basically acts as a new game plus. I didn't play any of it, but if you beat it, you keep on getting higher difficulties until you reach the highest difficulty, promptly titled Dante Must Die. The game is only 6 hours long, a length that's substantial enough for a first run, but length I feel is short enough to be primed for replays. After the third mission, you also get offered an easy mode. I didn't try it, but going off the description, this looks like a very well implemented mode. Its biggest change is making the controls slightly simpler to reduce the finger dexterity required to do more complicated things. I also love that you can't make the choice until after you've seen what the game is like and have fought in a boss. More games should do something like this. Instead of making playthrough altering decisions before even playing, give you a taste of the challenge and feel before you can opt into making it easier. On the visual end, I thought this game looked pretty decent for an early PS2 game. The upscale wasn't amazing, but it does more than a good enough job as long as a video file doesn't start playing. The lower aspect ratio was meant to mask the lower end textures, but they cleaned up better than many other games on this console have. In general, I just think PS2 games clean up pretty poorly, often coming out blurry, and the collection does a good job updating it to seem more contemporary to the time. The atmosphere, though, was pretty immaculate. The different areas you go through, like the sewers and the Valley of Mist, are full of life and detail. Even darker areas have a lot of detail that give off a great sense of desolation. I think it's another instance of the survival horror DNA popping through, because I didn't expect the detail and ambience to be this strong. The soundtrack tries to keep in line with that to mix results. The more atmospheric tracks weren't too effective for me, but the battle themes I loved, especially the first one that got stuck in my head for a while after playing. Halfway through the game, it swaps to a different theme that I didn't like as much, but it's still good, and a great way to wave off the repetition. I hold a similar sentiment towards the boss themes. Good, but not great. As for the bosses themselves, we have a great selection to work with. They each challenge Dante's movement skills in different ways. Phantom took me a moment to understand the best strategy. I kept trying to attack between his guards. The Singer does a lot of damage to him and interrupts his attacks, but in reality it's better to jump on top of him and spam the air attack. His attacks are tricky to dodge from the floor, but from up top you barely have to worry about it at all. Honestly, I think the Dark Knight would have been, if anything, a more intuitive first boss. He's harder, but I feel he's more comprehensible easily for new players, and introducing him earlier would make sense narrative-wise. Griffin has a lot of great attacks to dodge. Weaving between the lightning while shooting from afar is really fun and requires a lot of concentration. Then striking him when he gets close and piling on damage with DT made for a really fun encounter. When he gets his full moveset in the third fight, it's one of the best fights in the entire game. I didn't like the second fight with him on the boat, and that's part of the problem. Every boss in this game, you have to fight at least 3 times to make up for the small boss selection. This isn't inherently a problem. Refighting bosses as their moveset expands can be resourceful and still really fun to play. Doing this multiple times, though, for every single boss, sometimes hardly even changed from the last time you fought them, is exhausting and so blatantly padding. You fight Phantom twice normally and do 2 chase sequences of them. You fight Griffin 3 times, the second time feeling pointless and not being fun due to how crammed the area you're fighting in is. And the worst offender of refighting bosses is Nightmare. I hate this guy. The first time, I didn't think much at all. It was a bit unintuitive. He consumes you into a pocket dimension where you fight some skulls, then a phantom. After that, not only does a similar sequence never happen again for the rest of the fight with his similar looking attacks, but you also have to relight the damage symbols on the wall. After you realize that it's a simple game of taking openings and dodging his attacks. Once you get past the more unintuitive aspects, it's a good fight. But you fight him again with little changes outside of making you refight Griffin in the pocket dimension very soon after. When I got to this point, I was thinking, oh, I guess they're just reusing him as a frame of reference to show how much more powerful the Sparta sword is. I mean, yeah, it does that. But then you fight him a third time not long after that, and this time he makes you refight Virgil. and the new attacks he has in these later fights are just annoying. He makes you wait for near undodgeable attacks, at least I couldn't find a consistent way to dodge some of these. They come out too fast, have too much range, and the camera doesn't show you enough of what's going on in order to figure it out. He starts healing partway through. Overall, it just goes on way too long, and if you die, you have to restart everything. The skull phase, Virgil, the cutscene break, all to get another chance of all this other crap that doesn't make sense how you're supposed to circumvent it. It got on my nerves because this was so soon after both previous times. I just got past it using a Vital Star, but this fight left me incredibly frustrated. The only fight that deserves to be repeated as many times as it is of course, Virgil. He's introduced as a menacing Dark Knight, but as he keeps showing up, more of his true form is revealed. The fights themselves are great. Pure one-on-one sword fights with a fighter on near equal ground of view. All three of these put my skills and reflexes to the test in the best ways possible. Great attacks and patterns that are readable and learnable, and forces well thought out use of special moves and Devil Trigger. I wasn't able to beat the third form without resorting to Holy Waters because I didn't have any Vital Stars at the time, and his final phase attacks were hard to avoid. It was still a great fight. These were the best in the game. And I gotta say, this game just throws Holy Waters at you all over the place. I almost think they knew you would struggle with this fight. After Dante vanquishes Virgil, he recompletes the family pendant he has with both of their names inscribed on it. To me, basically confirming that he's the brother Dante lost. With the pendant complete, the basic sword Dante entered with transforms into the sword held by his father, appropriately named Sparta. It has insane range and insane damage output. Because you can't quickly swap it out with the other primary weapons, I basically just use it for the rest of the game. With this, Dante begins approaching the underworld. It's now revealed to us that Trish is actually working with Mundus, who has already struck down Griffin for not succeeding to kill Dante. Once Dante reaches the underworld, it contains some of the most complex areas and design in the game. You have lava, these vine guys, and some of the most difficult combat encounters in the game. In general, I feel the missions contain a lot of variety and well-paced. The combat encounters with exploration and light puzzles while remaining unique. The Valley of Mist did it best in my opinion, with some of the other missions being pretty standout in design, especially the mission with the last Virgil fight and the Underworld missions. After a bit, Dante has his last fight with Nightmare. Another thing that bugs me here is that making you refight a powered-down Virgil kind of devalues the final fight you had with him earlier. Partway through this fight, Trish begins to attack Dante as well. Despite the extra opposition, he's victorious. Trish is almost killed, but Dante saves her, because she reminds him of his mother, leading to one of his most passionate moments in the game, and I think it's earned. Regardless of appearance, she doesn't have the same heart, and he's ready to leave her behind and accomplish this mission without her. Dante makes his way to Mundus, who is planning to crucify Trish, it seems. He also claims to have made her, explaining her resemblance to Dante's mother. Trish somehow gets down from the cross she's on and takes a fatal hit from Mundus. He talks to Dante about how having human blood will guarantee that he'll never reach the strengths of Sparta, but Dante stands strong, ready for the final battle. And the first phase is a shoot-'em-up. Space Harrier was the first thing that came to my mind. It's not easy, but it's actually pretty fun and manageable to dodge. You have to shoot his rocks to fill up the DT gauge and hit him with a massive devil. Once that phase is over, you're on the ground for the rest of it. Once again, a really fun fight. It gets some platforming involved, some complicated attacks, and there are multiple ways to fight him. I was trying to keep my distance initially, but due to how long-range Sparta is, you can actually get on a high ledge and start wailing on him. Once Mundus is taken down for good, Dante leaves his pendant and sword behind for Trish, but then you have to escape the castle before it collapses. On the way out, it turns out Mundus isn't quite out for the count. As he's falling apart, he still insists on taking Dante down. While it looks like he's getting cut down pretty well, nothing seems to be able to kill him. That's when Trish returns just in time, unexplained, but able to give Dante's gun the upgrade necessary to end Mundus, and he drops this iconic line for the first time. Jackpot! Despite Mundus being gone for good, the situation still seems hopeless. That's when Dante reassures Trish that it's not too late. He reminds her of her true humanity by telling her that devils never cry and only humans can. That's when the old plane hanging out here from the very beginning of the game falls in and they use it to fly away. They fly back and Trish joins Dante at the newly renamed agency, Devil Never Cry. We get some playful banter between them as they roll out on another mission, ending Devil May Cry. I thought the story was pretty good here. It doesn't get much focus, but what's here works, and I think Dante is just a really cool character. He's such a fun and often charismatic protagonist that has enough hidden emotion behind the surface to be intriguing. The other characters are fine, they fill their roles well enough. The only thing that bothered me personally is that the subtitles only apply to the boss characters. There's no way to apply to anyone else, which bothers me. Otherwise, I like how much crazier the plot gets towards the end. At the end of the day though, overall, I honestly thought this game was really freaking good. It surpassed my expectations and did a great job introducing me to the series, and I feel to the genre. A super satisfying, deep, and fun combat, a great level variety beyond that, a decent story, a good presentation for its time, and some really cool boss fights. There were only a few major hangups for me. The camera could have been better, I don't like the yellow orb system, and the reused content can get exhausting. Those are some big problems, don't get me wrong, but far from enough of a big deal to make me say this game was anything but really enjoyable from start to finish. You can play it on pretty much anything from PS2 to modern consoles. It's on Steam if I'm not mistaken, and on all modern platforms. On PS360 though, it is only part of the collection. For all consoles afterwards, it's a standalone release. If you can play it, I would recommend it, because it was a really fun experience that's got me excited to play the rest of the series. Albeit cautiously excited in terms of the next game, Devil May Cry 2. I'm aware of its reputation, but given my impression of the series as of now, I think I might be able to get some enjoyment out of it. We'll see when I review it at some point soon. As for the first game though, I really enjoyed it, and it will certainly be something I'm coming back to at some point in the future. I give Devil May Cry an 8 out of 10.